Welcome to the Highwind Herald, a Final Fantasy podcast where we, two Final Fantasy obsessed brothers, discuss everything from Azura to Zell, and all things in between.
We are your hosts, Wolfkins and Soloist, the Brothers of Light. Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of Highwind Herald. I am one of your hosts, Wolfkins, and as always, I have my brother here with me, Soloist. How are you doing today, sir?
I am wonderfully great. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited to get into this topic. Today, we're going to be talking about our top 5 favorite Final Fantasies. We've been focusing kind of on the new stuff, so I figured today we should look backwards in the rearview mirror and kind of go through what we think are the 5 best. Now, keep in mind, we're going to be discussing what our top 5 favorites are, not necessarily what we think the top 5 best ones are.
Absolutely. Those are two very, very different things.
But before we get into that, I have our weekly trivia question. Are you ready? It is my week, and are you ready for this one?
Oh, I was born ready.
Okay, here we go. This self-taught musician would go on to compose some of the most memorable tracks in Final Fantasy history, including One-Winged Angel.
Uematsu?
Ah, you got it. Do you know the full name?
I don't need to know the full name.
That is correct. It is Nobuo Uematsu.
Hey, I got a music education degree. I think one of the things I hyper fixated on a lot with Final Fantasy, like in 1 year, was its music. So,
and that's why I thought you might get this one. So I didn't think it was too hard, but I was hoping I would throw you off a little bit. But you survived another week, so congratulations. Nobuo Uematsu is the answer for this week's trivia question. As always, we'll put the trivia question and the answer in the show notes as well. If you want to check those out before you listen to the episode, then if you want to guess on your own, feel free to. So anyway, Soloist, what have you been up to this week? Have you had any Final Fantasy in your life this week?
I want to get back into 14 and play it again some more. I'm still really burnt out on MMOs. I'm really interested in what's going on inside of that world and everything. Outside of that, I haven't played anything in Final Fantasy except I haven't even told you about this. I have this weird itch. I can't scratch it, and I don't know why I have it, but I have this weird itch to play Final Fantasy 12 again.
12? That was a random one I was not expecting to come out of your mouth just then.
I know. I have no idea. I really kind of want to play it again. I remember liking the battle system quite a bit, and I feel like if I understood the story, I probably would like it. You know, giving it a little more attention than you should give a story to understand it. Like, I don't feel like you should study a story to have to understand it, but here we are. I have a weird itch to play that game, and I don't know why. I have no idea.
Well, good luck with that. Not to spoil the later discussion, but Final Fantasy 12 will not be making my top 5.
Mine neither.
It's not one of my favorites in the series. I did play it again. I played it when it first came out, but I did play through it again when the Zodiac Age launched for the PS4. Didn't improve my opinion of it a lot. It still is one of the ones that I put towards the bottom of the list. I know that there's people out there, it's probably their favorite one. I'm not crapping on it right now, but it is not my favorite one.
When I picked the Zodiac Age up from the GameStop, the dude who sold it to me seemed to think it was like God's greatest gift on this planet. Like it was the best game ever.
I will say that the Zodiac Age was a vast improvement over the original one that we got here in America anyway. I enjoyed the Zodiac Age and the job system and what they did with that a lot better than I did whenever it came out for PS2.
Absolutely.
Well, I know you've been watching a little bit of 14 because you were actually up here over the weekend and watched me play about 2 hours of 14 as I fate grinded going for my upgraded resistance weapon, which I did get stage 2. I am working on the final stage of this patch, just grinding out the dungeons for it. I think I need 2 more, but that's kind of what I've been focusing on Final Fantasy.
I really enjoyed watching you play it too.
Yeah, it was fun. I haven't really had a chance to play any Final Fantasy V like I've been doing, but 14 I've definitely been putting most of my free time into just trying to keep up with that. And the Bosnian Southern Front is still one of the most fun things I've done in that game in a long time. I'm really enjoying my time in there too.
Yeah, it looked fun. All of it looked really fun. Most of what you were doing was just doing fates, but I still was watching you play the game, and we were discussing because I main a ninja, and we were discussing what to re-roll for me because I'm kind of not feeling it anymore. I don't feel the need to main the same job the entire time I play the game, unlike I did when I played other MMOs. So I'm on the job hunt.
I think you should give Monk a try. You've mentioned liking it in the past, so
Yeah,
and from what I hear, they've got some good stuff coming up from Monk. They're reworking it in
in the
5.4.
60s, I believe.
Yeah, maybe you should just finish that off. I mean, I'm a red mage through and through. That's what I'm going to be playing. But to what you just said though about watching me do fates, I think looking back, I think I did 45 fates that night.
Holy cow!
I burned,
Oh,
yeah,
man.
I burned through a lot trying to unlock that resistance weapon. It's pretty easy. There's a bunch of parties around because if you do fates in certain areas, that's how you work towards the upgrade items for these weapons. So there's a lot of people congregated in those areas right now anyway. So it went pretty quick. You get in a party and you just fly around and
Yeah, it seemed to go pretty quick. That did not feel like 45.
no, it didn't. Well, it was pretty late too. So anyway, before we get into our main topic, I do have a couple just news highlights I want to go through. Most of these are focused on Final Fantasy 14, but that seems to be where a lot of the news is right now. Just a reminder that the Make It Rain campaign is now live. It went live as of this recording. So that's Wednesday. By the time this episode actually comes out, it'll have been live for a couple days. This is a gold saucer related campaign that increases the amount of gold saucer points you get by doing tasks there. This is going to be live through November 20th. So if you've got something you're looking to buy, just want to check out the gold saucer, now's the time to do it. Speaking of the time to do it, they've also launched their free login campaign. So if you were ever an Eorzean Explorer and you want to get back in, between now and November 23rd, you can play up to 96 hours free just logging in. So basically, once you log in, I think they just track how much game time you've been playing. And
Now I got a question on that.
yeah,
So I've heard up until now that the game is free up through Heavensward, right?
correct. For the free trial.
For the free trial. So that means that until you pass through Heavensward, you play the game completely for free.
For the most part, there are some things that are limited. I'm not sure off the top of my head exactly what those are, but I do think there's some limited functionality. But as far as story, as far as leveling characters, if you just get the free trial, you can play up through Heavensward for free.
So if you ever start paying and get off the free trial, can you ever revert back to it?
No,
Oh,
no,
that's
that's
kind
not
of
how that works.
that's kind of lame.
So this would be if you're one of those people that bought it and now you've lapsed a little bit, this free login campaign, that's for you. This is the 96 hours for you to jump back in and explore. I think you're still subbed though, though you're not playing, right?
I'm not asking for me. Yeah, my buddy is coming over next week, and we were gonna play. So this works out well for him.
Yeah, he can play. He can play as long as he starts before November 23rd. He's got 96 hours to jump back in, get re-addicted, and then sign back up for another month.
Absolutely.
Also, my final bit of Final Fantasy 14 news, there is an All Saints Wake sale going on right now. So on the Final Fantasy 14 store, that's 30% off all of their spooky Halloween items. I know that I just bought me some Halloween items like 2 weeks ago, so kind of wish I had held out, although I've had a, pumpkin head running around since the beginning of October, so I've gotten my money's worth out of it, I think. But if you're looking to pick up one of those pets, or I think the pumpkin mount or something like that, I think they're all on sale for 30% off. So I do think that Square Enix is about to get a little bit more of my money because I absolutely love all of their holiday stuff. And a lot of their items are relatively affordable. Some of their mounts are kind of expensive, but most of their cosmetic stuff I feel like is affordable.
I've never looked at the store, so I can't tell you.
Well, they have a lot of stuff. So they have different cosmetic outfits. They have emotes you can buy. I do think the emotes are a little expensive. I think it's like $7 for an emote.
Yeah, I've never used emotes. That seems like the biggest waste of money ever.
Yeah, some people use them a lot. So, but yeah, they have way too many emotes that I would ever look at buying. But they got the mounts, the pets, and I think actually, your love of the twins, Alice A. You can actually get her outfit now.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
they
Wow.
just put that on the store, I think, a couple days ago. So you should rush out and get that as soon as possible.
Yeah, wow. That's awesome.
Well,
Cool.
if you're still looking to spend money and you don't really want to buy anything for Final Fantasy 14, there is new music available. So there's 2 new soundtracks that have come out. I don't know if soundtracks are the right word, but there's 2 new albums. There's the Symphonic Memories concert. This is music from all of Square Enix, so it's not just Final Fantasy. And it's recording from a December 19th, 2019 concert, I believe. And there's also Square Enix Jazz featuring music from Final Fantasy VII. I didn't even know this was a thing. Pretty interested to maybe check this out. I am going to put the links to both of those where you can get those in the show notes if any of that sparks your interest. So you've got, your concert music and your jazz music. I know that you in particular, Soloist, really like jazz.
Yeah, that interests me.
The links to that will be in the show notes if that's something that you're interested in pursuing. If you have money left over after this All Saints Wake sale, of course.
Is that Symphonic Memories concert the thing that we were gonna go to, but got
No,
canceled?
that's a little different.
Okay.
That is different. That was a new world. So Final Fantasy has a bunch of different, orchestras out there. The most famous probably being Distant Worlds, which, I'm having such a Distant Worlds withdrawal.
We've been to see them twice now.
I know, but that first time was just all it took to get me hooked. And then we went the second time, and
I
then
think I preferred the second show over the first, but that could be a whole discussion in its own.
yeah, and we could talk about that later. I think the second show overall was a better experience. Even just we kind of knew what to expect, and the people around us were really into it. Plus, there was the the barcade right next to our hotel. So all of that kind of plays into that being a great experience. But yeah, I was really looking forward to maybe trying to do Distant Worlds again this year, or a new world, which was supposed to be more intimate Final Fantasy music with strings and violins and just softer music. They have a very good 2 albums, I believe, out too, worth checking out for sure. As Soloist mentioned, we had tickets for March originally?
Yeah.
And then that got postponed because of coronavirus to September and eventually got canceled. So we haven't been able to do anything Distant Worlds or anything related this year,
We probably
unfortunately.
won't be able to for a really long time either.
Yeah, it's not really looking good, is it?
Nope. So we are in the midst of a plague. So we'll get back to it when we can.
But in the meantime, if you're looking to get that fix, there are some new music albums you can check out. Links in the show notes. But with that brings us to the end of what news I had to talk about this week. It's time to get into some arguing.
No. I've been both looking forward to this and dreading this at the same time.
Okay, look, it's probably going to go fine until we get to number 1.
Yeah, no, I think number 3 is going to be pretty bad.
Well, let's see. I will say this right here. There shouldn't be any major disputes until we get to number 1. Although I will say our tastes are very different. So I'm assuming
extremely different.
Our list will be extremely different. Here's what I want to do. I want you to go first. I'll follow up. So let's start at the bottom. What we're going to be doing.
You got to start at the bottom.
Top 5. So this is our top 5 favorite, not the ones we think are the best. Although maybe they would, maybe we think that too. But these are just the top 5 that we get the most enjoyment out of. So what I want from you, Solo, is just give me your number 5. Tell me what it is and tell me why it made your list, what you like so much about it. And then I'll either agree or tell you why you're wrong, and then I'll go into my 5th one.
So I'll start by saying that my top 5 list has shifted a lot over the course of my fandom for Final Fantasy. It started when I was really young. So since I've gotten into this series and I've started making top 5 lists, because making top 5 lists and top 10 lists is like my favorite thing to do. My list has shifted a lot because I've gotten older and my tastes have changed. I can't necessarily say that there's any that I've grown to hate. I've hated 2 since I've played it. I think that's going to be a theme. It's just ragging on 2. But this is my final list. I think this is a list that I can confidently say I've had for about 2 or 3 years now. And this is confident. This number 5 used to be my second favorite in the series, but now it's number 5. And that is Final Fantasy VI. Final Fantasy VI is a lot of people's favorite, and a lot of people consider this to be the best in the series. And I entirely understand both of those points. Final Fantasy VI is at its best when it comes to just world building. You have there's a lot of characters, this makes it hard to care about them. but it does help a lot with the world building because it feels like you take away a little piece of every place you leave. Like when you leave Doma, you take away a little piece of you take a little piece of it away with you when you bring Cyan with you and stuff like that. So the world building's fantastic. The summon system is one of the best in the series, but not quite the best. And the only thing that holds 6 back for me is the tendency that you kind of forget which character is your favorite, or you kind of forget to care about them since you have such a big cast and half of them like never speak because the majority of the cast is optional, which is what they decided to go for. It's a good interesting tactic to go for, but it just doesn't work for me when you just have a bunch of bodies standing there. And that's the only thing that holds the game back to me. Other than that, I think it has probably the best Final Fantasy antagonist through Kefka in the whole series. I think it has,
Oof.
yeah, I'm saying
The
it.
disagreements are starting early.
I think Kefka is by far the most intimidating and scary entity in the series because I really don't like clowns. But I think the soundtrack is up there with some of the best, not quite the best. And I think that just the visuals, what they were able to push the Super Nintendo to do, is absolutely fantastic. So that my number 5 will be Final Fantasy VI.
All right. Good choice. The differences have already started. Final Fantasy VI does not make my list. I don't disagree with too much of what you said, though. I think that what you said pretty much sums up Final Fantasy VI. My main issue has always been the huge cast. I like my games to have a smaller, more intimate cast, or a handful of people that the story's kind of like really revolves around. And six, I'm with you. It's hard for me to even make a good party in six because I'm like, oh my god, who do I like? I pick 4 people and I've left 26 sitting on the bench.
If it makes you feel any better, you can kind of just pick who you like in that game. I mean, there's everyone has a little bit of like identity to them, but
But that's
like,
my problem. I like more than 4. So how do I narrow it
yeah.
down?
Well, don't pick a final party. Just rotate it every dungeon.
Yeah, I like my you know me. I like having my core group that I just stick with.
Yeah, that's true. Well, whoever it is, just pick Mog. You'll have a good time.
I think I'll probably disagree with Kefka being the greatest antagonist, but we'll save that for another time. For me, number 5 is Final Fantasy X. This has been one of my top 5 favorites forever. It's moved down the list a little bit, but not because I like it less and less. There's just I just keep finding things that I just like just a little bit better. And let me preface, by the way, my top 5 list, all very close. This was a very hard list for me to put together because deciding what went in 3 and what went in 4 and what went in 5 was really hard. But I really love Final Fantasy X. I think it is possibly the strongest story of all of the main series Final Fantasies, not considering spinoffs or anything like that. The
Oh,
story is
snap. That's a bold take.
yeah, it is clear, it is concise, it makes sense, it has emotion. It just you by the end of this game, you really care about all of the characters. You see their journey, you see their growth, and that's why Final Fantasy X definitely makes my top 5. I love the battle system. I like the modified turn-based system that it has. And Yuna, I just love her. she's one of my favorite Final Fantasy characters just overall. So Final Fantasy X definitely makes number 5 for me. Yeah, like I said, I'd like to put it higher, but there's just other Final Fantasies that I have more fondness to for either, in the game or even external circumstances. We'll get to that in a little bit. But Final Fantasy X, do you have any major disagreements here?
I have a lot to say. I'll start off by saying I really don't like thinking about Final Fantasy X at all. And here's why. When I first
Hold
played
on,
it,
before we get into this, I just want to say we're gonna try to keep it. We're not gonna try to ruin anything, but from this point forward, there might be spoilers. So I
yeah,
just want
it's
people to
gonna be
listen.
hard not to.
So just keep in mind as we list which one we're talking about, because based on that introduction, I'm thinking he might eventually get to the end of Final Fantasy X. So if you don't want that spoiled, that you might start trying to jump around a little bit, move forward or something like that. But just just wanted to put that out there. Didn't mean to cut you off. Back to
You're
you.
fine. I actually don't intend to mention the end. When
Okay,
I
okay.
first played through Final Fantasy X, I was in high school and I loved it. It was number 2 on my list. I know I already said 6 was on my list, but this was the first thing to really dethrone 6. This was number 2 on my list, and I loved it. I'm getting older, and my tastes change, and every time I think of 10, I dislike it more and more. I still like it. I still think it's a great game. I think a good counter argument, I don't think the story is clear. I don't think it's easy to understand. I
Really?
still don't
Okay.
understand what is necessarily entirely going on with Tidus and Jecht. I
Okay.
know they're father and son. I feel like I could know if I was explained it, or if someone explained it to me, or if I looked it up. But I don't know how I get that full story through the game. Other than that, I do think it is some of Square Enix's strongest storytelling. The game's big weak points for me that really stick out is that the older I get and the more I realize, when I play games, I want to kind of play them my way, right? My way or the highway. 10 offers that to me in the sphere grid because you can build any character however you want. But at the end of the day, in 10, and I know I've complained about this a lot around you, I truly don't like completely linear JRPGs, and that is just really 10 is really where Square Enix started to do that a lot, with one exception. The whole game is pretty much going from point A to point B. You get some times later in the game where you can backtrack and do a few different things, but really all you're doing is just picking which point on the giant line you've been walking on the whole game you want to go back to. And the idea of an open world they give you, I forget what it's called, those open plains. What were they called?
Oh, I'm not. I know what you're talking about, but that I don't think is necessarily even that open world.
Yeah,
It's
that's
just
exactly
yeah,
right. That's not even open world, it's just a giant plain to walk around. That Final Fantasy X is a
Calmland.
narrative. Yeah, yeah. Final Fantasy X is a purely narrative experience that is something I appreciate, but sometimes I don't wanna log into a game and necessarily go straight through the story. Maybe I wanna do some side quests, maybe I want to find a hidden little area I didn't know about. That's what I really want from games nowadays. So
That's fair, and I think this is one of the main points where you and I do differ a little bit is because what I'm looking for from Final Fantasy is the story. I love the story. That's what I'm in it to experience. I'm playing Final Fantasy V right now, and I get out of the first what is it, the water crystal tower? No, wind. I get out of the wind tower and I'm just standing there. And I'm like, I don't know where to go. Like, I'm s- am I just supposed to find the nearest town? What am I supposed to do? And then that makes me feel overwhelmed and lost. And then I feel like I need to be looking up a guide to make sure I'm not missing
yeah, but
anything.
there's your sense of adventure. You're not always gonna have people telling you where the next point of your adventure is. Sometimes you have to ask and find out. You have to explore and be like, "Oh, look, here's something of interest."
But the game has a narrative that it's trying to deliver to me, and that's what I want to see. Because especially, I don't necessarily care what all these NPC town folks. I don't always care, especially in early in the game. I just don't care. So I don't want to have to go talk to everybody just to see if they'll give me a piece of information about. If I'm looking to do some kind of like deep exploration like that, I'm gonna go play D&D. When I sit down to play Final Fantasy, I just want the story. And that's where we're different because that's why I tend to like some of the more linear ones, Final Fantasy 13, whereas you just don't.
Oh god, that's not on this
So,
list, I
no,
hope.
we're moving on. What's your
Oh,
number 4?
alright. In hopes that I don't get disappointed later on. My number 4 is controversial for me in the past. This only recently scratched my top 5 list, but it's Final Fantasy V. Now, before I danced back and forth between whether I liked 4 or 6 more. Now, spoiler alert, 4 is number 6 on my list. Final Fantasy V is not the narratively strongest game in the series, but I will say, of all, even number 1, I think Final Fantasy V has the best system of any Final Fantasy game.
I would agree.
Absolutely. The job system is so in depth. It is so fun to explore and just completely en- engulf yourself into it. Final Fantasy V's weak point is telling its story in kind of a way that the 1, 2, and 3 did. Whenever it's following up 4, which was primarily, as cheesy as it was, story based. But Final Fantasy V still has a really in-depth story and has a certain point in the game, which I would argue did something very bold. And I'm trying not to say spoilers because he's playing through it right now. It does something very bold that it did before a certain other Final Fantasy game that other people are typically like, oh, that Final Fantasy game did this first. When five did. And you'll see what I'm talking about. You'll see what I'm talking about.
Well, even vague, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so unless you got spoiled on it, I really don't think you do, because
Wow.
I didn't see it coming at all when I first played. I was like, what? But yeah, Final Fantasy V, and then has one of the hardest final bosses. There's not much more I can say about it other than purely the gameplay alone bumped this all the way up to number 4 to me. It doesn't have a bad story. It has a very generic story where, haha, I'm evil entity, come back every 1,000 years, time to beat me again.
Yeah,
But
so far, I'm only past the second crystal, but I will echo, I think that the job system is one of the most interesting that I've seen so far. But yeah, the story is, oh no, crystals shattering. Oh no, we're heroes. Let's go save the world. Now, I'm not dogging on it. I'm actually really enjoying Final Fantasy V so far, but yeah, the story's a little light.
yeah, and have you met the main antagonist or even heard of him yet?
I don't think so.
Well, he
That's
don't
what,
don't get
X-Death or whatever,
yeah,
right?
X-Death. X-Death, his character description is bad guy. He does not have any in-depth backstory. He is
Yeah.
just bad guy.
And
So
stuff like that, I do look for a little more motivation in my villains. Some of my more favorite villains are the ones that have that drive to where you can actually step back and say, "Oh, from their perspective, I see where they're coming from." And that's
mhm.
why, some of these villains at the end, like X Death and one that I'm sure we'll talk about before this podcast is over, just really rub me the wrong way.
Oh, I thought you were talking about somebody, and now I realize you're talking about the oh god.
Anyway, so okay, that's a good pick. I will not give you too much crap for that pick. But it's my turn. And I gotta say, this one was a hard one for me for 3 and 4. Back and forth to figure out which one got the higher billing. And I have really wrestled with this, but I have to put at number 4 Final Fantasy 11.
Oh, thank God. I know you
I
don't like 13 better than 11, so I have
I
nothing
don't
to worry about.
I don't know. Oh, you're just waiting for me to say 13.
Oh god, I'm so glad you didn't. We need to have a whole episode about that that game.
Hey now. Final Fantasy 11 was my first introduction to MMOs in general. And oh my god, did it take over most of my high school life. I absolutely love this game. It was at one point the only thing I was playing, and I have had so many great times playing this. In fact, if we're just ranking which Final Fantasy we've had the most fun with, Final Fantasy 11 is number 1. There is not a single other Final Fantasy that I have had more fun playing, that I have more fond memories over. Every time I hear the theme song for Santa Aurea, I just get taken back to that time in high school where I was playing this up all night with the random groups of people that I'd found. Because once you got in a party in this game, you did not leave that party because you would never get it back. So if it was a good one, you stuck with it no matter how late it got. Final Fantasy XI has given me more enjoyable moments than any other Final Fantasy. The only reason that it's not like number 1
Yeah,
is
it's a little
because,
shocking.
well, there are things about it, especially I just played it over the summer a little bit more. There are things about it today that it's showing its age. There's things that kind of hold it back. The MMO market is a little different now. Like I said, I just played it a couple months ago. For quite a while, I hadn't hit. I had stopped playing before they upped the cap to 99. So I wanted to go back. My goal is to at least beat every mainline Final Fantasy. So I considered beating one of the MMOs max level and completing the main story of the base game. So that's what I wanted to do. So I did that, and I again loved it. I love the world of Vana'diel, of Final Fantasy XI. It is one of the most gorgeous, thought out worlds that I've played, especially in Final Fantasy. But there are just some aspects of it to where it's starting to show its age. It's a little bit harder to do, and it is more of a grind. So that's one of the things that kind of holds it back. It's a little bit harder to just pick up and play these days. So that's why it's dropped down a little bit. But I know you don't have a lot of experience with Final Fantasy 11, so everybody just has to take my word on how great it is.
Yeah, but I don't. I'm actually surprised it's that low. I don't have any qualms against picking Final Fantasy 11. I tried to get into it recently. You know that we were in Discord. Um, it has potential for me to like it a lot, especially since I can main a blue mage. But I could see your point. I don't have anything negative to say because my experience was short and mostly positive. I can see where you're coming from. I preferred the kind of slower MMO combat thing. I liked that a lot. Whenever I'm playing other games like 14 and WoW, I like a fast GCD and a really going quick. But that was a lot different, and it didn't feel like an MMO, and I really liked that.
Yes, it feels it has a different feel than most other MMOs on the market, especially today because it's an older one.
So I don't have anything. I think the soundtrack is amazing. I have
Oh, the soundtrack is so
nothing
good.
bad to say about that. I feel like I'd really enjoy that if I got into it. Might stream it in the future at Starcaller Soloist on Twitch.
And like I said, my top 5 are razor thin close. Like this one and my third one have gone back and forth.
My 2
I
and
just
3 are
I just
close.
had to pick one to put above the other. And it was like a last minute decision as I was typing my list out because they're all razor thin 4, 3, and 2. Could jostle. Actually, it's more like a tie of 1, then the next 3, and then Final Fantasy 10.
I mean, my 2 and 3 are really close, but my number 1 is on a completely different league than any of these.
All right. Well, that was a nice segue. What's your number 3?
Okay. My 2 and 3 have went back and forth for a long
Crystal
time.
Chronicles, right?
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh yeah. This is probably not even final because I'll probably change my mind tomorrow. They're that close. But as I'm standing right now, my number 3 is Final Fantasy VII. Now, Final Fantasy VII is the end all be all for a lot of fans, or favorite game. And we discussed this earlier in the show, but it's not this show, but I think last episode. 7 was a lot of people's in the West segue into Final Fantasy.
It was
I didn't
mine.
play it. I didn't play it until I was in college. I didn't play it until about like 4 years ago, 3 or 4. And well, needless to say, I loved it. And I'm talking about the PS1 version, not the remake, by the way. The remake was great and all, but I don't think it'll ever be able to hold a candle to the original to me because I love classic Final Fantasy. I love turn-based RPGs. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with 7 Remake, but Final Fantasy VII, it's little goofy characters that run around with their paintbrush hands, the amazing, albeit confusing story. I, for one, like the materia system a lot, and the characters are what really drive that game for me completely. Barrett was my absolute favorite character in the game, trying to be like this big tough guy, but holding a soft spot for his daughter and eventually having a soft spot for his party members. Tifa's adorable. Red 13 is,
The
awesome.
greatest character.
Awesome. My final party was Barrett and Red 13, actually. I don't think you can play that game without Red 13. You don't have a soul if you do. But every
He
character in
is the
that game,
best.
I mean, the character development in that game was so good that they made an entire spin-off about an optional character. Like, let that sink in.
Right. Well, I mean, Final Fantasy VII, it has the compilation. It has the biggest expanded universe out of any Final Fantasy property.
Yeah, and there is
There's
an
a reason for
entire
that.
reason for that. Yeah, it is a very, very good game. Absolutely amazing. The soundtrack is one of the best in video game history. One Winged Angel is known by everybody.
Composed by Nobuo Uematsu.
Yeah. There's nothing more I can really say about this game other than the weak sides or that it has shown its age. That's about all I can say.
Yeah, but as soon as it starts showing its age, they remade it.
Yep.
I will say, I agree with a lot. When I was a lot younger, I actually thought the materia system was the end all be all. This is how all Final Fantasy should do it because this is the way, as the Mandalorian would say. As I've gone over, I've soured a little bit on the materia system. I know we probably lost few listeners based on that.
Actually, no. The majority of the opinions I see online is that a lot of people don't like it.
Really?
Yeah.
I used to really like it. I have soured on it. It does kind of make all of your characters feel not as unique, but I think my biggest problem is it's very hard, especially with how much that game makes you switch characters. I felt like I was constantly redoing my materia. It was hard to just set it up and have my setup because, oh, okay, now this character's going to run off. Oh God, what did I have on him? Now I have to build my materia back
And
out
if
on.
they run off with the materia, do they keep it?
Well, I think if they go off, I think it's dependent. I think there's times during the game where you get it back, and there's times where they hold on to it because they're not gone that long, and then there's times when Yuffie just takes all of it and runs away. So that's fun.
Well, yeah.
But I there's just little things like that kind of annoy me on my playthrough I did a year or two ago that I had forgotten about. And then I also sometimes it can make you feel, depending on how many slots you have, like, oh God, this weapon's so much better, but the materia slots are less. I know it's a choice, and I know that's the design they were going for to make you have to make that choice, but I do think I prefer other systems similar to like 5 or 9 even, to where you kind of learn abilities as you go, and once you become so proficient in that ability, you can keep it even if you switch. But so yeah, one thing that was interesting about materia is you could level it up on one character and then swap all of that progress to another character. So that was interesting.
Yeah, there's really hardly anything negative to say about it.
All right, going on to my third one. This one is you're probably going to see a pattern emerging, and it just barely beat out its predecessor. But Final Fantasy XIV is my third.
I cannot believe you're able to say you like that better than 11 now.
Okay, now listen. Hold on now. Listen, got to hear me out. Like I just said, these things they're tied. Like they are on the same level. I just had to pick one to put above the other. And I picked 14 for this reason. The story for 14 is presented in a much cleaner fashion. It is delivered with 11, the story's there. You have to look for it. Even the main story, the missions they have, still make you look for it. Whereas 14 presents it in a nice, clear, here's your story. And 14 has some of the best storytelling of the series. When you look at Shadowbringers and Heavensward, both of those stories are just phenomenal. So literally, Final Fantasy XIV edged out 11 just because of the story. Now, like I said before, when I think about my fondest Final Fantasy 11 will always surpass 14 just because of that nostalgia from before. But as far as the game that I had to pick for 3, I went with 14 because I think the story is there. I think the way they present it is better. It's a cleaner, more polished game, especially after A Realm Reborn. And it allows me more customization with my character too. In my head canon, because I made my characters look exactly the same in 11 and 14, basically the same name. In my head, they're the same character. Like my champion got finished with Vana'diel and found himself transported to Hydaelyn. So with that kind of mindset, 14 allows me to do a little more customization on what I'm viewing as the same character. So I kind of view them as like this bundle together. So that's why I went ahead and put 14 just a little bit higher than 11.
I like 14. 14 doesn't scratch my 5 list, by the way, but that doesn't mean I don't like it. It probably falls at like I can't even say where it falls. Because a lot of the time I find myself not counting MMOs when I realize I need to, and I have a hard time making myself count them. But Final Fantasy 14 is absolutely fantastic. Like there's nothing I can say really bad about it.
Well, then if you've got nothing to say, let's move on to your number 2. Don't know what this is going to be, actually. I'm curious.
Number 2 is Chocobo Mystery. No.
See, okay. Well, see, you almost took my number 1. I thought you were going to say Chocobo Racing, and I was like, dude, that's my number 1. Which
side point, Chocobo Racing
I love that game.
Great. All right,
that was a fun game.
This is going to be the most controversial pick of the entire episode. I'm 100% sure.
2.
A very mixed game in the fan base but my second favorite Final Fantasy game is Final Fantasy 15. And
Oh, the fight
yeah,
starts here.
Final Fantasy 15. I am not going to ignore all of the things that are wrong with it. It is complete bularchy that most of the story was hidden behind DLC. It's complete bularchy that you can't
DLC that never got
understand.
released, by the way.
Well, there's only one that didn't get released, and they
I
released it in a graphic novel.
I thought there was like 3 that didn't get released. I do know they completed the story in a graphic novel, but I think there was more than one that didn't get released.
I thought it was just episode Noctis that was left out. I could be wrong though. I could be wrong, but it is complete bularchy that the antagonist's biggest expedition, you couldn't hear it because Noctis was feeling himself a little too much.
I think they patched that after the game was released. But yeah, I remember getting to the climax of that and just I was like, what are you saying? I can't hear you. And of course I didn't
Yeah,
have subtitles on. Just a quick note, it does look like that there were 3 DLCs that did not get released. Noctis, Luna Freya, and Aranea.
that's the first I've heard of that. Well, I mean, if the story's finished, I'm really sad that they didn't end up releasing all the DLC, but because the DLC was really fun.
I actually didn't play any of it. I bought the original season pass, and I don't think I touched a single one of them.
Final Fantasy 15 is the game in the series that is most catered to what I want. It's still not my favorite, and that'll explain that in a moment. But you literally are thrown in. It says this is where you need to go, but just look at all this, and you can just ignore everything and go do whatever the heck you want. I believe no world in the entire Final Fantasy. Again, I'm not counting MMOs. 14 probably does a better job at this. There's no world that feels more alive and engulfed in than Final Fantasy 15's world. And the whole reason is because you're literally in the world. I personally love the battle system. I love warping around everywhere. I feel awesome. The characters, we mentioned before that it was a very different thing that, you have 4 bros with heading on a road trip. That was a dynamic I didn't know I really wanted until I had it. Now, there would be a really big problem if Final Fantasy had a tradition of having stuff going on like that, but every other game has really strong female leads. Final Fantasy 15 did not. So I didn't so much mind it because it was a brand new thing, and it had a really, really interesting dynamic because a lot of people like really focus in on wanting to have a really good romance, but Final Fantasy has done this in the past, but no game has done it better than 15 to really like have a dynamic between friends that is as deep as a romance is usually. That game is not about romance between Noctis and Lunafreya. That game is about your friendship between your friends. And as I get older, that's something I realize that I care about probably just as much as romance stuff because, the older you get, the more you lose friends, and the ones you keep and hold on to, those are the ones that, you care about. This game really like speaks out to that. The story is amazing, but not presented the best. The thing that puts Final Fantasy 15 so high on my list is my experience with it. No ending to a game has made me get such goosebumps and tear up quite like 15 with a few exceptions. Yeah, I think the things that hold this game back to a lot of people is the presentation. 100%. I think Final Fantasy 15 is absolutely an S tier Final Fantasy game though.
Wow.
One of 2.
So you got really deep there in the middle. So it makes me feel bad about disagreeing with you. So interesting. Okay, yeah, I would not put Final Fantasy 15 as an S tier personally. In fact, 15 is near the bottom for me.
As it is most people.
I recognize what you're saying, and I understand a lot of the benefits of that too. It does. I do definitely agree that it focuses on that bond. That is probably the best thing this game has going for it. And the last 20 minutes of the game. Here's a spoiler. But once the time jump happens and you come out as badass Noctis with the facial hair, from then to the end of the game, I thoroughly enjoyed 15. Up until then, I felt kind of like I was always just muddling around. I just didn't really get engaged with it. I like the concept of an open world, but I think I would have preferred that open world had it been a little bit more like classic Final Fantasy, or I don't think I like the modern setting. That was a little bit of a turnoff for me.
I loved it. I loved it, loved it.
I like either the futuristic type settings, such as like Final Fantasy VII, or the medieval settings like Final Fantasy everything else. But I didn't really dive into just like the road trip, and I hated just going somewhere and having to wait in the car while I like actually drove for 5
See,
minutes to
that
get
is
somewhere.
another thing that we disagree on. I loved picking a good song to listen to and just looking at the world and the landscapes, the sunset, the
Oh,
sunrise.
it's a very pretty game. Don't get
I
me wrong.
loved I never minded long road trips. I always loved it, and that's an unpopular opinion, but I just was engulfed. I loved it. Absolutely. I see very little wrong with the game. I really do.
I see very little right with the game. So, and again, I'm glad you like it. I'm not trying to say you shouldn't. It definitely was not my cup of tea. I just didn't really connect with it. It is one of those Final Fantasies that I've kind of put on my list of revisit one day just in case. Maybe I'll try to play the Royal Edition that has all the DLC kind of baked into it. Maybe I'll connect with it a little more.
The DLC definitely helps.
I didn't really buy into the battle system. I was so glad Final Fantasy VII went in a different direction, and I'm hoping Final Fantasy 16 does too, because I just wasn't feeling Final Fantasy 15's battle system. I felt like magic was basically useless and non-existent in it. I don't think I ever used magic at all in that game, really. And the warping around was really cool, but it took me a while to understand the whole going to 0 hit points kind of system they have set up to where you don't fall unconscious, but you're staggered. And
Well,
it
I
took me a
like
while.
that. I like that because when you're in like a high like action battle system and you have to watch out for your health to hit 0, you're dead. A lot of times in 15, you'd go from full health, you'd blink and you'd be at 0 and staggered. Like if
Right.
you had been dead there, the game would have been too hard. So they
I
give you
agreed.
they give you wiggle room there to get your characters back up. I highly appreciated
No,
that.
I just wish it had been something more like give me more HP. Like I like how Kingdom Hearts does it. When you get low, it's got that little "Woo." Give me more HP. I just
You
hated.
like that?
I
That is
do.
annoying. Woo,
Well,
woo,
then
woo, 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 woo. That was
then
awful.
heal yourself or don't get hit. Stop sucking. But
No,
I
no,
didn't
you
like
can't
how
say that. You can't say that because that is just stupid. It's just bad. It's just dumb. You can't say just don't get hit on Kingdom Hearts.
have you been on YouTube? There are all sorts of people that literally just don't get hit. I'm
Yeah,
not one of those
and
people
they dedicate
at
their
all.
lives to that game.
I am not one of those people. I was being facetious. But what I'm saying is I prefer having, a hit point when I go to 0, I'm down. I just because like you said, one hit would sometimes stagger you. And I just felt like, oh God, I'm getting staggered all the time by something I probably should have avoided.
Well, that's probably you might be too low a level when that happened.
Possibly because I thought the side quests were tedious and mind numbing, so I did as little as possible.
They're just the same as 14.
It feels different in 14. That's what I'm saying.
In fact, I like them better in 15 because at least in 15 you're exploring like completely unique areas and like really beautiful places. Like when they'd send you into caves. Oh man.
I mean, 14 has unique and beautiful caves.
Yeah, but it just doesn't touch.
But here's the thing. I like the battle system on 14 better, so I don't care to kill these random things with 14 because I'm having more fun while doing it. So that's the kind of the difference for me. So, when 14 sends me out to find wine for somebody, I don't care because I'm still enjoying fighting that stuff. When 15 sends me out to make cup noodles, I'm like, God, I don't want to do this.
Lord.
Anyway, moving on. We're not going to really talk too much about this next one
Yeah, I have no idea what this is going to be.
because for my number 2, Final Fantasy VII. So we're not going to talk too much about it because we kind of already talked about it when you went through yours. Now, I will say 7 has long been one of my favorites. I don't think I necessarily would have put it as 2 if it weren't for the remake also. I've kind of lumped the remake in with this. 7 has always been high up there, but the reimagining they did for the remake just reminded me how much I love these characters in this world. And viewing that as part of the Final Fantasy VII package sent this right to my number 2. 7 Remake is my favorite game in the last couple years. I just think that game was I think the battle system was great. I loved the way they fleshed out Midgar, fleshed out some of the characters even more. It made just Aerith the sweetest, best video game character in history. But yeah, so 7 and 7 Remake kind of bundled together. That's my number 2. We already kind of talked about it, so
yeah, we don't have much to say about 7 at this point.
let's get on to your number 1.
Oh god.
And let's try to keep your reason why you love this game under an hour and a half, because I've heard it a million times.
Let's cue the WWE fight music.
I'm not gonna fight you on it.
You say that.
I think our opinions are more differing on 15 than they are this one.
This is where most of our sibling rivalry comes from right here. All right, my number 1, and this is I'm expanding this beyond Final Fantasy. If this were a top 5 video game list of favorites, this wouldn't change. This would still be number 1. But my number 1 is Final Fantasy IX. No matter how many times I play that game, I think that is the only of 2 games in existence that I can play over and over and like it better every time.
What's the other?
Persona 5 Royal.
Okay.
Yeah. And Persona 5. In fact, that Final Fantasy IX is my favorite game ever, but I think the best game ever is Persona 5, but that's another topic. Final Fantasy IX is just special to me in multiple ways. Does it do everything better than every other game? No. 5 has a better battle system. That's about it, in my opinion. I think it has the best soundtrack of any Final Fantasy game. I think it has the best character cast of any Final Fantasy game. I think it has the best story of any Final Fantasy game. I think it is just everything about it makes me tear up, and I love it, love it, love it, love it. It is 100% amazing. And I know I'm not saying anything like good. I'm just like gawking over it, but I've just I get flabbergasted when I think about it.
Most of your other introductions and talking about have been very laid out with nice thoughts and drawbacks, and this has just been like, oh my god.
Basically, to me, and the thing I get from 9 is that the game is about a bunch of depressed people and one extrovert that everyone finds annoying until they realize how much that extrovert has changed their life for the better. He helps Vivi realize, yeah, you're gonna die someday, but let's enjoy the time we got. He helps Dagger learn how to be a human and like not be so proper all the time and just let loose and relax. He teaches Steiner the same thing, just gets that giant rod out of his butt. And then towards the end of the game, when Zidane falls down that hole, everybody else he helped comes to help him. I don't think there's a more powerful moment in any video game ever than that.
That's a pretty cool part. I do really like that part of Final Fantasy IX.
The absolute best part. A lot of people say their issue with Zidane is that he's annoying. I think
that would be me.
I think Zidane has more character than any character in this whole series. He is not a copy-paste thing. He does not have tropes. He is Zidane. I feel like he is the most personal and just I am who I am character of any of them. And he has one of the biggest arcs of any character in the series. He is, and the whole story is revolved around him and his relationship with the party members and how he impacts them for the better. And at the end of the day, whenever he helps them all and they help him and then they all come together to come and save the world, it's just, it feels impactful. It feels better than, oh, we saved the world, we did this. It feels like we can only do this if we're together, and it's all thanks to our relationship with each other. And that's just the moral of a story that I think a lot of people need. A lot of people really need to like feel like that. A lot of people need to try to be that beacon for somebody else to maybe help pull them out of a slump they're in, or maybe we need somebody to pull us out of a slump.
You need to stop getting deep because it's making it really hard for me to crap on it. That's your plan. You come off sounding like the moral high ground, and I'm just the jerk that comes in that craps all over your dreams. No, I actually don't disagree with really anything you just said. I think, well, a little bit. I do find Zidane annoying, but I don't disagree with the moral of the story and what they're trying to do, and the part where all of his friends rally behind him in his darkest moment is probably one of the coolest. I mean, even I was kind of moved by that portion. And Final Fantasy IX is not one of my favorite games, so it's not in the bottom. It's kind of in the middle. But even that moment, I was like, "Whoa, this is this is good. This is good
Yeah, the whole
storytelling."
the whole game is great storytelling. Is just
The
oh
last 5
my well,
minutes aren't.
actually, the last 5 minutes are very good storytelling because
Sorry. Sorry, the last 5 minutes, okay, yeah, the ending movie is great. I do not like I think Final Fantasy VII would probably be higher on my list. It might not crack my top 5 because I really like these 5, but man, it loses me every time, and I just played it this year. I played it this summer again, just because, we'd been having this fight forever, and I wanted to see because I played it when I was in high school, and I just wanted to give it another chance, and I did like it a lot better this time. But man, every time I get to Necron, I'm just like, "What is this? Ugh." We should have just ended with Kuja. It
yeah,
had the
I'll
best
give you
ending.
that.
Like, it had set itself up for the best ending.
100 actually, it would have been better. I
Yes.
don't hate the idea of Necron, and I'm sick of pretending I do. I
Ugh.
don't I don't hate it.
Ugh. That's
You
what I say to
know,
you.
it is
Ugh.
a random, very random last fight to have. That aside, he's very well designed and very creepy looking. He's a very good final
Yeah, he
boss,
looks nice.
but he doesn't mean anything to the story.
Here's the problem, though. He means nothing, and then as soon as you beat him, he also doesn't have anything to do with the ending. Like like, even in the ending movie, there's not even a mention of him after he's introduced. It just seems like he should have been a secret boss, and I swear every time I get there, it just drives me nuts because 'cause I'm like, "You had it. You teed this up for such a cool and like, final battle against Kuja, and then you pull the rug out from under Kuja and say, 'Never mind, we're giving it to this blue dude.'" And I feel like it takes away the
That it
impact of
does.
Kuja. Yeah, I think it really kind of takes away what he was supposed to be.
At the end of the Necron fight, Kuja's the one that saves you, and that kinda shows as the turnaround arc for Kuja realizing, "Hey, maybe I shouldn't have tried to kill everything on the planet."
Okay,
Necron one of my
that's fair.
favorite things about Necron is what it's done to the community of Final Fantasy IX. Now people come together even to this day discussing, "Hey, what was that?" "Well, here's my theory, and here's what it actually is," because someone actually interviewed the producer. My favorite theory is that there's two theories: is that it's a reincarnation of the tree boss you fought earlier in the game, and the other theory is that it was the exactly what it is, an evil entity from another realm coming to just return everything to zero, but that it was possessing Kuja the whole time, and Kuja was never bad. That's my favorite theory. It doesn't make much sense because that takes away from Kuja's origin story.
I don't like that either. I would rather exactly. I'd rather Kuja be acting on his own
Yeah,
instead of being possessed by Necron.
Necron doesn't impact this game at all because if you just scrunch that away, you still have one of the best polished games of all time. And Necron is weird. It doesn't take away anything though to me. It's not like a big eyesore to me.
It is an eyesore to me. It's one of the things because you know what I've said it before. I really focus on the story, and that just is such a big. I don't know. It's such a big blight on the story for me. It just makes me. But again, it doesn't really take away from the overall package. It does impact my view overall, but it doesn't really take away from some of the other things you said because I do think Final Fantasy IX has a really good battle system, despite the fact that it takes 45 minutes for the battles to load. But the PlayStation 4 speed up really helps with that. But apart from that, I think it has a great battle system. I like the system about learning new abilities. I think that's good. I've always been kind of turned off by the art style. I don't really like the
Oh,
muted well, hold on. I don't really like the short they're not quite chibi, but everybody looks kinda squished down. I just never really got into that art style. I just don't dig it.
oh god, I tried to be mature and you brag to the art style and my just an arrow through my heart. Oh,
All I said was
ow!
I didn't care for it personally. And it was an artistic choice that they made. I mean, it was something that they decided to do while they were doing it. It didn't resonate with me. I think it makes it look a little more cartoonish, and it just wasn't really what and it's different than like Final Fantasy VII, because Final Fantasy VII, you could tell they were going for a mature look, but they were held back by what they could do at the time. Whereas Final Fantasy IX, it was an artistic choice to just do some of the things they did, and I didn't really care for it. Also, I did find that there just wasn't a lot of characters that I really, really liked. I loved Vivi, love him all day, all night. I love Freya. Yeah, I'm gonna make you mad again. Steiner annoys me to no end, and I don't understand why he's wearing shorts, but that's a little different.
How can you say Steiner has one of the biggest turnarounds in that game?
He does, and I'm not saying he doesn't have a good character arc, but especially in the beginning, I found myself being annoyed, but I do like him
Oh
towards the
my
end.
god. Oh my god, what a
Okay.
I'm not trying to say bad opinion, I'm just gonna say what a different opinion. Oh,
Yeah, we definitely have different opinions because bringing me to my number 1, you have the similar reaction that I have to Final Fantasy IX. My number 1, so this wasn't necessarily my first Final Fantasy, but it was the first one that I really, really, really got into. I have played it again recently just to see if it was nostalgia that was kind of coloring me. And no, I played it late 2019 again, and this still remains my number one Final Fantasy VIII, which I know is not the most popular one, although it has a bigger following than people like to pretend it does. People like to pretend that everybody just hates it. That's not really true. It has a lot of sales. I mean, especially when it first came out, it sold a lot. I think it was only behind Final Fantasy VII. But I just love, like, kind of doing what Soloist just did. I just love pretty much everything about this game. I do like the art style better for the PlayStation 1 type games. I do think it was kind of that more mature, realistic looking art style. I I connected, especially with when I originally played with this game, I connected more with the characters. It's kind of the inverse, though, of what you said about Final Fantasy IX, to where, Zidane is this beacon of light that kind of pulls all these people around him out of the darkness, whereas Final Fantasy VIII is kind of the inverse. It's about Squall, who's kind of locked in his own darkness. And then you have your upbeat, peppy character in Renoa, who then brings him out of that. And it's about, him coming back to the world, allowing himself to open up, allowing himself to feel love again for this person, and just watching him kind of struggle with those emotions of like, you know, I'm a mercenary. Why am I feeling like this? But I feel for this woman who I've just met, and I'm a big star. I love romance. I love romantic comedies. I love stuff like that. So Final Fantasy VIII just hits all those notes. Plus, I kind of like the futuristic stuff, and I like when it gets weird with the time travel towards the end. I like that it has mysteries that still are not explicitly stated within the game, but that are actually hinted at. Instead of just dropping, hey, here's this random thing we're not going to explain, fight it, and we'll never talk about it again. I like that it doesn't necessarily, like, again, spoilers, Laguna being Squall's father. This is never explicitly stated in the game, but the hints are there. When you visit different areas, it's talked about with NPCs. Sometimes, some of the places you can go, the hints are just layered on, but it just stops short of telling you. And there's a difference between presenting a bunch of things and just not quite confirming and dropping something out of nowhere. Now, there is a difference between the two. Also controversial, I like the junction system. This is something that I know people absolutely hate, but I find the junction system and being able to, take the magic. I do find it a little weird, the magic being more like an item. I do think that's weird. But I do like the concept of, taking these elemental magics and junctioning them to your strength, your HP, and them having different effects based on how you configure your characters. But for me, it's always about story first. And Final Fantasy VIII always speaks to me emotionally with the relationship of, Squall and Renoa, and just watching them kind of develop their relationship as they go, And I love, I think people might crap on this too, I don't know. But I love the space rescue scene. I love that scene where Renoa is just kind of floating out there in space. And, right before she dies, right before she's about to take her last breath, she kind of sees the ring that Squall gave her floating in front of her face, right as he makes it to her and rescues her. And that gives me chills. And then, of course, Eyes on Me playing in the background while they're like coming back to Earth. Everything about it just kind of hits all the chords with me. And you haven't played all the way through Final Fantasy VIII, so you can't crap on everything.
Played through 8 when I was really young. And I got to the end of Disc 3, literally entered the final dungeon, and just logged out to go eat dinner that my mommy cooked because I was a baby. And just found myself never coming back. The one thing we have in common with 8 is that I think it is the Final Fantasy game I've started more than any of them. Because I can never keep my interest beyond Disc 1. I really don't have anything to say that's not what you also said about 9. This is just difference in tastes, I do believe. I think the art style in 8, especially before the remaster, made me want to puke. The remaster looks a lot better, but it doesn't change that the art style is just not my taste. I think everyone's too lanky, and they run weird. I don't know.
Speaking of running weird, that is another thing I really like about Final Fantasy VIII, is that all of your characters are on screen at the same time. I like that your party follows you around. I just always thought that was cool, because it was really the only one that was doing that. I think is it still the only one that does that, apart from the ones that, like, your party are there, like the newer ones? Like, even 10 didn't do that. So that was something I just really always enjoyed.
I do like that too. 8 is one of those games that I think I would enjoy more if I played it in my adult life, and I have it downloaded on my PS4 ready to play. But all I can speak of is what I know about 8, and it is that I think the junction system is the second worst system in the entire series. Only worst to 13.
Wow. It must really hurt to have such a wrong opinion about both 8 and 13. I definitely disagree with the junction system being one of the worst. Also, we can get into this on another time, but I don't really know what your problem with Final Fantasy 13 system is.
My favorite part of Final Fantasy 13 is when I turn my Xbox off. But Final Fantasy 8's junction system is negative. Awful. I don't like it at all. That's majority of what holds that game back for me so much. And it goes with what you said about itemized magic. Itemized magic is weird. I think so too. It's not what holds it back for me too. Itemized magic is also in 15. Because you itemize your magic to use as nukes or whatever. The system in 8, the tutorial kind of does a bad job explaining it, first of all. I think it's not confusing, but it's really hard to use. If you don't look up how to use it, it's really hard to use well. I don't think it's hard to use to get by, but like, there's a lot of stuff about it that you just kind of have to know, either through a lot of experimenting or looking it up. And it just, I don't like having to sit there and dedicate like minutes upon minutes to drawing magic from an enemy. That just, it's monotonous. And you can do the whole tape, rubber band the X button down and leave it while you go eat lunch or something, sure. But it just stands, I already am an advocate for, if you don't have to level grind, don't do it. I don't want to stop my game to sit there and just level grind. To stop the experience of the game to level grind. I don't think that is good game design in the slightest. And the way the drawing works in 8, sure, there's drawing points, but the way it works, having to draw off of enemies, if you want to truly get the most out of the junction system, it's forcing you to stop and grind. When I play through, I'm looking right here at all of my lists. It's 9, 7, 5, 6. I don't know if you count side quests as grinding. I don't, so I'm not going to. So all of my top 5 on my list, I've played through all of these games without grinding, without feeling a need to grind. And 8 feels like it forces it upon you to draw. And I don't think that's good game design.
Well, I do have a counterpoint. So Final Fantasy VIII, yes, the drawing can be a little tedious and monotonous. That the speeding it up on the remaster makes it a lot faster and easier. But I don't view this as any different of leveling up your materia. You can draw the bare minimum and get by this game. Like you said, it depends on how much you want to get out of the junction system. So I don't think you should color it any different than some of the other stuff. So the if you can draw here and there and still get by with enough stuff, especially since everything matches your level. So of all the games you don't have to grind levels, Final Fantasy VIII's the same one. So the same thing can be said though for Final Fantasy IX and Final Fantasy VII with your abilities. If you want to level up and get the highest materia, you're gonna have to grind that out a little bit.
Yeah, those are so easy to get, though. You can get those just by fighting every encounter you get through the game. I had almost all of the abilities on all of my characters by the end of that game, just by making sure I always had equipment on that was learning something. I never equipped the best equipment. I said, this is maxed out, change equipment. And I never grinded.
But what about Final Fantasy VII? You're not going to max your materia without doing a little grinding.
You know, I said I liked the materia system. I don't get it either, so I don't really remember having to max out my materia that much. I kind of feel like what I remember that it's the same as 9, that it wasn't that hard to max out. So I could still just play the game.
No, you have to grind if you're wanting to max out some of those materia. Some of them, especially, I think the all materia takes a lot of AP.
If you want to compare grinding to grinding, in 7 you'd be grinding playing the game. In 8 you're going to a halt to use the same menu item over and over, and that takes away from the core gameplay of Final Fantasy.
And that's also to your point. If you really want to get the most out of the junction system, you don't have to have a full stock of magic to use the junction system adequately.
It's really annoying that it doesn't really. The tutorial's not good enough, so you don't know what magic is the best for your slot. So what if you waste a bunch of time grinding the wrong magic just to find out, oh, this is better, let's do it all over again?
Well, that's no, that's not that. The tutorial does a decent job of telling you what you need to do. And yes, there's some trial and error, but they also have an auto button that does it for you. Like literally there's a button that says auto. Do you want to do strength, defense, or magic?
The fact that you might find magic a little later on that is better than what you have in your auto slot.
Then re-hit the auto button and it places it. Again,
yeah.
If you want to get the most out of this, yes. And I'm not saying the draw system doesn't get a little tedious, but at the same time, once you cap it to 100, you never have to do it again. And you don't have to cap it to 100 if you don't want to. You can max your stats without 100 in a lot of these things.
I'm gonna leave it at this. That's why I don't like it, if I had to give you a reason. And another reason is just that I don't like it, you know? I just don't like it. It doesn't mesh well with me, and it's just weird. It feels lopsided. And the drawing thing really is standing in my way. I just feel like it takes away from the gameplay, which is Final Fantasy gameplay, so it's not bad. Let me get on to the point of the characters. I don't remember too much about it. I personally am not so much one, and my favorite character in 7 is not Cloud. I'll start by saying that before you use that as a counter argument. And you can probably tell from my top 5 list here, a lot of my characters are go lucky and happy. Noctis is kind of an exception, but his bros help him out. My biggest problem with 8's characters is that I don't like Squall at all. I'm trying not to sound completely negative, and I don't think it's Squall's fault. I just don't really like that kind of main character. And I remember the last time I played this game, and I thought, okay, I'm giving this a sure try. Here we go. It wasn't 5 minutes into the game before he says to Quistis, you don't understand me. You can never understand me. And I literally think I started bleeding because the edginess cut me. And that, that was just... I don't hate edgy stuff. I love Sonic the Hedgehog, and Shadow is way more edgy than Squall. But when it's your main character, it just kind of is weird. I like anime a lot, but my favorite animes are usually the ones with the dopey, stupid main character, not the edgy edgelords. And this is entirely based on taste. People like that. With me, it doesn't work. If I got to the end of the game and saw him being brought out of his shell, that might boost my opinion on him. But as it stands now, my favorite character is Zell, because he's hilarious and goofy, and I love that. That's my character of choice.
And that kind of brings us to the difference of opinion, because, Zell's probably my least favorite character in that game. And the type of character you just described, I don't feel works as well as a main character, which goes back to our, the biggest disagreement we have. That's why I don't like Final Fantasy IX as good as you do. Because where you say Squall's edginess cut you, Zidane's over peppiness and his weird, uncomfortable flirting it makes me physically want to turn the game off sometimes. And I am glad I pushed through because towards the end of the game, all of that kind of comes together. But especially early on, I had a similar yet opposite, reaction to him as you did, because I was just like, he seemed so overly peppy and self-confidence that wasn't earned that it turns me off a little bit. But I am glad I pushed through because, like you said, that the narrative really kind of gets into, his positive influence on those around him. Just like I feel like 8 takes the opposite and kind of has the positive influence of someone like Renoa on Squall to bring him kind of back to everybody. So, there's similar stories just told from different points of view. Really.
I've heard that story a bit, but I don't think any Final Fantasy like love stories are very unique at all. I think I can end this at this. I know along with 2 and 13, 8 is one of the only 3 games in the series I haven't beaten. I got close enough that I feel like I can have an opinion, and I know every story point about 8. I know how it ends. I know the time travel stuff. The soundtrack is great. Don't have to say anything bad about the soundtrack. It's great. Final Fantasy VIII, as it stands, is not my least favorite. Of the 3 I haven't played, I like it the best. But I do have confidence that if I finally sat down and played it as an adult, I think I would appreciate it more. But as it stands, and maybe next week when I have my new setup, I'll start streaming a playthrough of it or something.
Try the remaster. Try it. I just give it a try. I tried Final Fantasy IX again earlier this year, and it improved my opinion of it. So give 8 a try. And then maybe we can revisit that if you do start playing through it. Because I don't expect it to shoot to your top, but I do think that it will move up a little bit because I think there's a lot there. And I think there's a lot there that you're not seeing, honestly, just because it's been so long since you have played it. That we'll see. I'll be curious to check back in on that in a little bit.
As it stands right now, if I had to say if I liked it or didn't like it, I don't like it. And I know you say you like 9, and I sound like the jerk here, but I don't like it. Right now, I don't like it. When I replay it, we'll see if I like it. But if I have to go based on what I know now and what I've experienced now, it's on the bottom half of my list. I like 12 better than it.
Wow.
If it makes you feel any better, it's still better than that god-awful, scummy Final Fantasy 13.
All right. Well, with that, I think that we call this episode a close. In summation, in review, Final Fantasy VIII is the best Final Fantasy, and Soloist is kind of a jerk.
That is an opinion, and Final Fantasy IX is really good on its own merits, as is Final Fantasy VIII.
Do you have anything else that you want to mention? Where can we find you at, Soloist?
So please look me up on YouTube at Soloist. We're wrapping up our Banjo Let's Play and starting up a new Let's Play that I think the audience here on this show would really like, wink wink, so check it out. If you want to know the kind of Let's Plays I do, they're really in-depth. They're not like fart jokes and everything. I try to really keep it informative and funny, so come check it out if you want to know more about some of the games I'm playing. On Twitch, find me on Starcaller Soloist. I think starting next week, since we've talked about it so much, I think I'm just going to rip off the bandage and just stream a playthrough of 8 starting next week.
Do it.
So I'm going to do like probably Tuesday 8s, Thursday, see if I want to play it again, and maybe some 14, and then retro days on Saturdays and whatnot. Yada yada yada. Twitter, I'm at soloist_TV. That's where you can get a lot of my, random thoughts that approach me during the day. We talk a lot about Final Fantasy here, but I tweet a lot about One Piece. So if you want to know about that at all, find me there. I think that's all I'm doing.
All right, and you can follow me at Twitter at Wolfkins. And I also want to remind everybody we do have a website, highwindherald.com. And as of this week, we are now available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. So you should be able to find us on any one of those. I think we're probably out there on a couple other podcatchers as well. But that's it for me. We do have a Discord channel. The link to that is always going to be at the bottom of our show notes. So if you're interested in joining and coming and chatting with us for a little bit, we do have a channel. We can do that. Maybe throw out some show ideas. Like I said, the format of this show is going to be, kind of random topics like this in addition to the news. So if there's anything you want to hear us talk about, hop in the Discord. We'll have a channel for that. And let's just hang out and talk. But if there's nothing else, Soloist, I think that we can call this an afternoon. a nice hearty discussion we just had with some agreements and some disagreements.
We didn't get childish at all towards the end.
I don't know. You interrupted me like 6 times.
I don't know. I think you're about to cut out some of my good points. I have no idea.
The power of post. All right. Well, with that said, thank you all for listening. We do appreciate it. Have a great day. We'll see you next week.
Peace out.